I'm Mark Halperin.
I'm John Heilemann, and with all due respect to Jeb Bush, you sound an awful lot like George Michael these days.
I thought I would talk about a little bit more about my journey of faith. Faith, guided by my faith. Faith has impacted my life. The faithful people of faith, where people of faith can act on their faith, and I humbly ask for your vote. Thank you all very much.
Happy National Martini Day, and that's shaken, not stirred, sports fans. In our lineup tonight, guns, grits, and Graham. But first, the big guy, God. It's the Faith and Freedom Coalition Conference, the sequel, the onstage face-off at Ralph Reed's Shindig in Washington between Jeb Bush and John Kasich. One, the establishment favorite. The other, the establishment challenger. Let's watch them go at it.
I didn't come here for politics.
Today's not going to be a political speech.
As a young man in the church and in my life, I felt the Lord.
I converted to being Catholic in honor of my wife and because I believe in the Blessed Sacraments and they give me great comfort.
I know that the role that I have to play on earth to lift people, to realize that all those who are made of the image of the Lord need to be upheld.
But we also put the most vulnerable in society at the front of the line, guided by my faith.
The drug addicted, they could be in your family. Get them treated and get them on their feet to live their God-given purpose.
And we also put the rights of the unborn in the front of the line as well.
If you're a minority, we're going to include you, and we're going to lift you.
We should not push aside those that do believe in traditional marriage.
Everyone is made in the image of the Lord. Everyone has to be given an opportunity. Everyone. That's what has to happen in America.
So, Marcus, who did better, Jeb or John, and what are the implications?
I think Kasich did a little bit better. Jeb Bush wasn't bad, but John Kasich gave a version of this speech to the Romney donors out in Utah last week, and it fell a little bit flat with them. When he connects his own faith, which by his own acknowledgement has grown stronger as he's grown older, when he connects his faith to his public policy agenda, it not only diffuses for some people the attacks from the right, but it makes him a passionate orator, which he sometimes is not.
I think neither one of these guys is good. They both, I thought, did good today. I can't even make a choice between the two. I think they both did fine. They both did well. Neither of them is going to be the candidate of the Christian right under any circumstance. But both are men of deep faith. And I think we know from past Republican nomination fights, you don't need to be the candidate of the Christian right. You just need to be acceptable to the Christian right. I think either one of these guys could be acceptable to the Christian right.
By dint of fundraising, by dint of polling, Bush is going to be in the game here, almost certainly.
Yeah.
Kasich has to fight his way in today because of his strong performance, one of his best days so far, in trying to fight his way into the second tier or the top tier.
The polls are helping him, too.
Last night, Hillary Clinton talked about the tragic shooting in South Carolina during an interview with Las Vegas super journalist John Ralston. This was part of the Democratic frontrunner's response when asked what can be done to prevent another shooting like what happened in Charleston.
Let's just cut to the chase. It's guns. And we have to have a better balance. And I know you're going to have a universal background check kind of provision on the ballot here in Nevada. But the Congress stops in the face of tremendous lobbying pressure from the gun lobby. So maybe on a local and state level, we have to keep building towards some kind of more sensible, balanced gun policy.
So, John, why has Hillary Clinton, in that interview, up till now catered to the left on almost every important issue that's come up? Why on this issue is she not catering to the left, but basically saying you can't fight the NRA in Washington, D.C.?
Well, one of the things we know about Hillary Clinton is that she has a long memory, and this is a woman who's been through a lot. She's been through her husband's administration. She's seen her husband, Al Gore. She then saw her colleague, her President Barack Obama, also find out that she couldn't fight with the gun lobby. I think that still leaves the opening to take on the gun lobby if she wants to, but I can't help but think that the scars and the experience that she's had tell her that it is a losing battle.
If this is a mobilization election, and all elections are, and it will be, states like Ohio, Virginia, Colorado, even New Hampshire could be in danger for Hillary Clinton if the NRA is more riled up than they are now. They're pretty riled up against her. She wouldn't want them more riled up because of history.
You can go out and rile up the Latino vote without riling up a counterforce. In this case, there's a counterforce, right? Okay. By now, virtually no one in their right mind doubts that the Charleston slaughter was inspired by racial hatred. And now the focus is shifting to a conspicuous symbol of historical racial animus, the Confederate flag. The very Confederate flag that flies over the Capitol grounds in Columbia, South Carolina. So, Mark, after years of debate and stubborn resistance in some quarters, including in South Carolina, is this the event that finally tears down that flag?
I would normally say no. In this case, I think the answer is maybe. If you look at recent polling, the most recent polling we could find, African Americans think the flag should come down. Whites in South Carolina, majority say no, it should stay up. You got to have respect for the people of the state to decide on their own what they want to do. But in this case, as President Obama has said, I think correctly, it belongs in a museum, not flying on the Capitol grounds. And I think because of the tragedy, this is one of the biggest tragedies the state's ever seen. Yeah. Because of the connection to the flag, I think there's a chance that the legislature will vote to take it down.
I hope you are right. I pray you are right. I mean, I find Lindsey Graham, others, Mark Sanford, who waffle on this issue. Well, it's a symbol for racial hatred on some side. Some think it's a symbol of the history of states' rights. I think that's all. It's basically crap. It's like, you know, it is a symbol of the Confederacy. The Confederacy was about trying to secede from the Union to build an economy and a separate country in the backs of 4 million slaves. That's what it's a symbol of, and I think it would be great if some Republicans were to have the guts to say, this isn't any of those other things. This is what it is a symbol of. As a symbol of racial oppression, it's got to go.
There's been a lot of change in cultural attitudes in the South and elsewhere on this issue. Changes come slowly. If they do change it, it's going to be a fight.
And it will be the one good thing that comes out of this if it happens.
All right. Earlier today, Vladimir Putin gave an interview to our pal Charlie Rose. I was at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum in Russia. Putin said he's concerned about the United States engaging in Syria. He also said the United States is to blame for the crisis in Ukraine and that the United States does not seriously take into account Russia's interests. Putin was also defiant with a capital D when Charlie Rose asked characterized Russia's actions as aggressive.
I do not like using the term aggressive. We are not being aggressive. We are persistent. We are consistent in pursuing our interests.
So it's kind of hard through translator to always get the nuance of Vladimir Putin. But overall, as you looked at his performance today, was he more threatening than he seemed of late, or basically what we've come to get used to?
I actually think less threatening on the basis of just this performance. If you didn't know anything else, you were meeting this guy for the first time. He came across as quite reasonable through this interview. In the interview that Bloomberg Television did with Charlie Rose, our friend afterwards, Charlie was like, you know, he seemed not like a teddy bear, but that would have been like a guy who would not be an outcast in the theater of nations. But we obviously, unfortunately, know exactly what he's been before. This was a very restrained performance.
But to me, it's more threatening because with Charlie, he could have taken the opportunity to try to send a more explicit message. And he is still a stone-faced killer. That's what he is.
Well, that's the truth. Yes, of course, that's the truth, yes.
And the reality is that, you know, you talk to Americans in the U.S. government, you talk to European diplomats, they all say Putin continues to have the upper hand. The economy may not be good, right, but his polling numbers are good, and he is undaunted, playing the long game. Right. With very little ability of the United States or any other Western country to do anything to influence his behavior.
And the one thing you could see there was he signaled over and over in that interview that he wanted to have some outreach, he wanted to have communications with the United States, and yet on no issue was he willing to give any ground that might actually open the door to that kind of diplomatic engagement.
So I agree he didn't seem more threatening, but again, I thought he might take the opportunity with Charlie to send a signal. He did not.
Okay. All right. After the break, a revealing personal conversation with the presidential candidate unlike any other, Lindsey Olin Graham. We'll be right back.
Last weekend, on the eve of the release of presidential candidate Lindsey Graham's e-book memoir called My Story, sat down with the South Carolina Senator at Mitt Romney's E2 Summit in Utah. We started out talking about the experiences that shaped him into the man he's become. At the top of that list, why he's so dang funny. You got pretty much a joke about everything, which is one reason you're
got
popular.
A lot of material to work with.
Your Senate colleagues like you, media likes you,
That's
a lot
nice.
of voters like you, because you're a happy-go-lucky guy. And I'm wondering where that comes from.
Well, my dad owned a bar. And if you own a bar, the goal is to get people to come into the bar and stay as long as they can and drink. And the more they like you, the longer they'll drink. But my dad was a really outgoing person. We owned a bar, a restaurant, and a liquor store, so we're in the service industry. Service industry people have to have the attitude the customer is pretty much always right. But you got to be tough, because if you don't watch it, somebody will take your business over. So I think my sense of humor comes from my dad.
Was he a quipster the way you are?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't, I don't get up and tell, 14 jokes like Kenny Youngerman, but it's situational humor. My dad was very clever. And again, a bar owner, a restaurateur, I mean, these are the people who interact with the public, and if you don't make it a fun experience, people don't come back.
So this was your personality when you were a teenager? What we
Pretty
see
much,
today?
yeah. I was the guy that was, talking when I shouldn't be talking. But at the end of the day, I think your personality does come from the people around you, your parents. And I grew up in a very gregarious environment. We owned 1 or 2 bars in the town. It was a small mill town where you had the cotton mill, and everybody worked pretty much in the cotton mill. Clemson University was right down the road, so it was kind of an interesting place. But, when they would change shifts at 3 o'clock, they'd come in and drink.
People are still getting to know you, so I want to talk about some of the bigger moments in your life, at least as I understand them, and just have you talk about how they were for you emotionally, and as someone going through that phase of your life. Obviously, the biggest thing to start with is your parents dying when you were 21 or so, just a few months apart, just a little over a year apart. Just first talk about your mother who died of Hodgkin's disease. What was that like? How long was she sick for?
Diagnosed in the fall of '75, died in June of '76.
So when she was diagnosed, how did she tell you and your sister?
Well, I remember I was back home from, neither one of my parents finished high school, so I'm at the University of South Carolina. 1975, I convinced myself I wouldn't get kicked out of school. I went in 1973 as a freshman to college. I remember when my parents dropped me off, my sister was holding my leg. It was the longest night of my life. We're a close family. The first thing about me, I was unconditionally loved. My parents were older. My dad was in his late 40s when I was born, in his mid-50s when my sister was born. So they focused on me. I was an only child for a while. But I remember watching the liquor store. He had taken my mom to the doctor. She had been sick and nothing was happening, and we finally changed doctors. And he pulled up, just really disheveled, and he came in and he was just crying, and he said, "Your mom's not going to make it." And I think they told him that she was in the last stage of Hodgkin's, stage 4. And
how did the family spend then the rest of her time?
Well, she was a fighter. I guess what I get from my mom is a determination. She was quiet. She was social enough, but she was very quiet, dedicated to the family. Every year she'd set some money aside each month for Christmas. She'd open up a little savings account, and every month she'd put some money in there to make sure we'd have a good Christmas. She doted on us. She was very, very attentive mother. And she fought, man, I tell you, she wanted to live so bad. She got sick, like I say, sometime in the fall of '75, and going through chemotherapy. And when you got a family member who's in a bad way, you want to will them well. I mean, you don't want to give up. God knows she didn't want to give up. Easter. That Easter in '76, she had her best Easter. She was feeling good, and she cooked dinner for the first time in a long time.
So just the 4 of you, other family there?
Yeah, no, there was some family at first, but in the evening it was just us sitting there on the couch. And I remember saying, "Well, boy, I gave you a good dinner, didn't I?" I said, "Yes, ma'am, you did." And, so we thought maybe we're going to be the 1% here. And by June, she was gone.
What were her final days like? Did you spend time with her?
They were tough, yeah. My dad was in one hospital. He had some prostate problems, and she was in another. And if it wasn't for family, I mean, what do people do without family? I had an aunt and uncle, and my sister's, 12 years old. So I'm going back and forth from one hospital to the other. But I had aunt and uncles in both hospitals. I mean, I was just so lucky. I just think that what do people do without family?
Were you taking off school at that point, or still trying to do your studies?
This was in June, so it was in between. They wanted me to graduate so badly. She would have no part of me dropping out of school. I wanted to, just come home and help. Absolutely no go. And I just remember just the pain she was going through. And I remember just saying, "Mom, it's okay. It's okay."
So
she passed.
In that intervening period of months, after she had passed and your father was still alive, what was that like for the 3 of you to try to pull together?
He's 67 and she was 52, so you always thought Mom would outlive him. Yeah. Well, life's just not that way. I've learned life is fragile and you can't take a whole lot for granted. So I'm going back to school. I try to get in law school. I don't make it. I've got an Air Force ROTC ROTC commitment. I'm thinking about getting the Air Force, out of the Air Force. And I said, no, we'll work with you. So I went to graduate school for a year, and I'd come home every weekend. You know, they were intent. My dad was, you know, he came down when I got commissioned with my sister to put my lieutenant bars on when I graduated. But I started graduate school in the fall, trying to, you know, get my grades up, my LSAT numbers up, so I can get in law school. And early in September, he died.
And how did he do without her?
It's terrible. But, you know, he had 2 kids. I mean, he said, you know, don't be an old man with young kids. And, you know, he understood what was going to happen, and it's tough.
We'll come back with the second half of our conversation with Senator Graham after this word from our sponsors. So we just showed you part 1 of our conversation with South Carolina Senator and presidential candidate Lindsey Graham, which we held at last week's summit in Utah, hosted by Mitt Romney, of course, before the shooting in Charleston. Here's part 2, starting with the subject of Graham's Beltway besties. The 3 amigos.
Absolutely.
In the Senate for a number of years. You, John McCain, who of course still serves with you, and Joe Lieberman, who was there. Talk about the start. How did the 3 amigos, how were they born?
Well, of pain. They were born of pain. So John McCain, sort of a Republican maverick. Joe Lieberman had been the vice presidential nominee of the Democratic Party, lost the election by 500 votes in Florida. So along comes Iraq. The thing about Joe Lieberman, and I think any politician can learn from, is he didn't want the job too much. He was progressive by any reasonable definition, but when it came to radical Islam and the war, he understood that we had to get Iraq right. And he was willing to stand by Bush, who had made tons of mistakes, and he was going to adjust his strategy. He was going to go all in to surge. And Joe wouldn't give an inch. He stood by the president. He was I think, the only Democratic vote to keep us from pulling the plug. Right. And that bond. See, John, you know, he'd been a contrarian in his own party. Joe Lieberman became sort of the outcast, I guess, on national security. And I was John's wingman in 2000 and 2008. And it just from that bond of where people wanted not to lose a war that we thought we couldn't afford to lose, and it came from there.
Yeah. So what are the activities of the 3 amigos?
Mostly me going around saying what they meant to say. No, we went everywhere together. We busted our butt to go to Iraq to try to find out what's working and what's not. The one thing I can tell any senator, travel. If you care about national security, there's no substitute for being on the ground. I've been to Afghanistan about 22 or 23 times, 14 or 15 in Iraq. We'd go a lot, and you could see it get worse and you could see it get better. So the 3 amigos basically were a traveling roadshow. We were going all over the region, trying to find out what was working and what was not.
Has Senator McCain been giving you a lot of advice about how to run for president, which he has done?
He is. One, he's glad I'm running. He will help me wherever he can and when he can. I got to become Lindsey Graham. I got to establish myself, but John will be there.
But I mean, in terms of private advice,
basically just
because he watches a lot of political television.
Oh, totally. I mean, he watches you. I mean,
so what does he? What do he calls? What does he say?
You got to show up. Got to show up. Got to show up. Got to show up. Don't let all the garbage bother you. You know, they're going to throw everything at you and everybody else that runs. Just stay on your game. Focus on your message. Commander-in-Chief, ready to go on day one, and do weddings, funerals, bar mitzvahs, anything you can in Iowa and New Hampshire.
There are a lot of bar mitzvahs in Iowa, by the way.
Well, whatever they are, I'm going to own that vote.
So,
that's the key to Iowa, by the way, the Jewish vote.
It is.
Very few people know this.
But you've unlocked the secret.
I have, yeah.
You are doing something now you've never done, run for president.
Yeah.
Is it making you more of a happy warrior, or is it starting to grind you down?
No, I'm actually enjoying it, but, you know, it's different when it's your name. I mean, it's sitting there with John, and, you know, it is so much different when it's your name. But I think I've got a piece about why I'm running and who I am and what I have to offer, and I really feel like I'd be a good president. I'm dying to have the chance to be a commander-in-chief worthy of the sacrifice of the 1%. We'd take the fight to radical Islam, but we'd do more than that. We'd build up others. We'd be involved in the world. You know, building a small schoolhouse in a remote region in Afghanistan to educate a young girl will do more to hurt the Taliban than any military engagement. So I see the whole of government approach to this. But back here at home, I'd love to have the ability to be a Ronald Reagan and find a Tip O'Neill to come in and say, okay, let's do entitlement reform, let's do Simpson Bowles.
What's the worst thing about being a senator?
Juggling so many demands on your time.
What makes you think you could be a good president?
because I've got the background, experience, and judgment to be commander-in-chief, which is the hallmark of any presidency, is can you protect the nation? Over 30 trips in the region, 30 years in the Air Force. I think I'm good to go on that front. And I know that the next president has got to do what I've been willing to try to do. Fix immigration, deal with the long-term debt problems generated by the retirement of the baby boomers. No matter who it is, they better be willing to do what I've tried to do. And I think if I were president, I could get these issues over the line.
Last two questions. Since President Reagan, of the 4 presidents since then, who's the best and why?
Since Reagan, who's the best president and why? Well, we'll take Obama off the list.
Thought you might.
Yeah. Best overall president. Well, since I'm a national security guy, I would say this. It probably surprised people. I think W had the right view toward the enemy. Execution, not so good. But I think he understood what we were in for after 9/11.
So 43 is the answer.
43.
Last question. If you were elected president, would you be the funniest president ever?
Given the field, yes.
That's a group of people in which you considered you could be the top.
No, I don't know. You know, I did.
Taft was a laugh
Will
riot.
McCain said that Grover Cleveland was funny. I don't know. I never met the guy.
Yeah.
But, you know.
He used to kill on Jon Stewart.
Did he? What? That's what I heard. Bottom line is, I think his sense of humor served Ronald Reagan well. I have a sense of humor. But the purpose of humor is not only to enjoy your own life, to have other people enjoy being around you, but also to make a point on occasion. So, yes, I think being able to laugh at yourself is a prerequisite to be president or senator or anything else, but not to take yourself too seriously. I've checked that block.
Senator, thank you.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. You're nice to share. Our thanks to Senator Graham. He's obviously enjoying himself, and I think, you know, he's not vaulted to the top of the field, but his performance out on the campaign trail is one of the big surprises, I think, of the cycle so far.
Well, look, you know, we all love a happy warrior, and he has been joyful and mirthful so far. I mean, his problem is that there's this other Lindsey Graham, who's the apocalyptic Lindsey Graham, who earns the mockery of people like Jon Stewart, who you just mentioned. But when you see that side of him, very appealing. The hair on fire side, not quite as appealing.
Yeah, and of course, if he decides to run and he runs strong, and he's going to win the South Carolina primary as a favorite son, native son, he likely could. It has a huge impact on the race.
It does.
Some people predict he may well get out at the end and endorse somebody, and that would have a huge impact.
Hard to see him as the nominee, but easy to see him as a factor.
Yep. We'll be right back.
TGIF, everybody, go and see the new Pixar movie. It's supposed to be great. And read Melinda Henneberger's piece on the left and right, trying to lobby the Pope ahead of his visit on BloombergPolitics.com.
We're on twice a day at 5 and at 8. Until next week on Monday, same bad time, same bad channel. Thanks for watching. Sayonara.